Sometimes, when a cartoon gets cancelled, it's because it was seen for the mistake it was and axed early before it could cause any more damage. While other times, it's because an otherwise great series just fell victim to corporate meddling and other unfortunate circumstances that were completely outside the creator's control. And it burns when this happens, which is why I've compiled 9 great cartoons that absolutely did not deserve to be cancelled. Let's kick some tires and light some fires. I love the original Voltron series, but as iconic as the show is, it hasn't exactly aged well, both in terms of the animation and especially in terms of the fashion. I mean, just look at Hunk, and especially look at Keith. Which is why it only made sense to revive this 80s classic for a new generation with 2011's Voltron Force. Now this series is actually a pseudo-sequel to the 80s series that centers around Keith and the original team, alongside 3 cadets who are training to be the next generation of Voltron pilots, as they battle Prince Lotor, who is now King Lotor. Now I really like the show's art style and character designs, and how much personality and life there is behind the animation, and I really wish we got more shows that look like this. I also really appreciate the constant nods to the original series, like bringing back Sven for an episode. And in this series, the team's uniforms actually match their lions, and Keith finally shaves his mullet. But sadly, the show was cancelled on a cliffhanger after only 1 season because it was unfortunate enough to air exclusively on the Nicktoons network. For those who don't know, the Nicktoons network is a secondary channel Nickelodeon sends shows they don't care about to die, but let me elaborate. You see, Nickelodeon is a basic cable channel that's available in almost every US household, whereas the Nicktoons network is a premium cable channel that only about 1/3 of US households get. And thus, if a show airs exclusively on the Nicktoons network, it basically has no chance of getting the ratings needed to be renewed for another season. As was the case for Voltron Force, which is really unfortunate because the show had a lot of really creative takes on the Voltron franchise, and I would have liked to have seen where it took things, or at least have gotten more of this cool art style. But this show's at the start of the list because, well, as much as I liked Voltron Force, we did get Voltron Legendary Defender 5 years later, which is just infinitely better than Voltron Force in almost every way, besides faithfulness to the source material. So if Voltron Force getting cancelled meant we got Voltron Legendary Defender, then I can live with that. I just wish Voltron Force could have gotten at least 1 more season. So, Cat Scratch is a show that I caught a few episodes of on Nickelodeon way back in the day, then I completely forgot about it, until the mysterious Mr. Enter did a video on it as part of his Nickorama series, where he called it the funniest Nicktoon. So I then tracked down a couple episodes, and I have to agree with him. Like, I do not remember this show about 3 cats inheriting an entire estate being this good and this funny. Every episode I watched had me laughing all the way through, and we get some pretty impressive visuals with these weird psychedelic adventures these cats go on. With its similar character dynamics and style of humor, Cat Scratch could have easily been Nickelodeon's answer to Ed, Edd n Eddy, but sadly, Cat Scratch came out at the wrong time for Nickelodeon. By the time the 2000s had rolled around, Nickelodeon had adopted its policy where if a show didn't get as good of ratings as SpongeBob, then the show would get dumped on the Nicktoons network to die, which is sadly what happened to Cat Scratch. But what's even sadder is how hard the show is to find, because aside from a few episodes on some compilation DVDs, the show has never received an official home release. It's not on Prime, it's not on Vudu, it's not even on iTunes. And for a show as good as Cat Scratch, that is a mother war crime. Premiering on MTV in 2001, Undergrads is a hilarious show about 4 lifelong friends all going to college in the same city that had the misfortune of coming out at the tail end of MTV's phase of experimenting with adult animation, and thus only one 13-episode season was made. Which burns because, as a recent college grad myself, this has to be one of the funniest, most relatable shows I've ever watched. What we have here is a show about 4 extremely likable college buddies all going through the typical college stresses like rush week, the freshman 15, making new friends, identity crises, and Risk. I'd always be the first to lose when playing Risk. All of which is portrayed in ways that are both relatable and hilarious, and at times heartfelt. And all of this is set to one of the most beautifully 2000s angst rock soundtracks you'll ever hear, complete with an intro theme by Good Charlotte. The one thing I'll say is, a lot of the show's humor comes from references to pop culture that was popular in the late 90s, which can easily make a show feel dated. But things like Star Wars, Full Metal Jacket, Quake 3 Arena, and Risk are all remembered as classics, so the jokes still hold up.
But I haven't even copped a feel yet. What kind of crappy date rape is this?
Oof! Except that one. That would not fly nowadays. In fact, this whole episode wouldn't fly nowadays, which honestly makes it somewhat of a guilty pleasure. God, the Devil, and Bob, as the name implies, was an adult cartoon about God and the Devil going on all sorts of wacky and at times heartfelt adventures with a guy named Bob. That first aired on NBC in the year 2000 before being pulled after less than a month due to heavy backlash from religious activists. The 13-episode series was then dumped on Adult Swim where it could air in its entirety, over a decade later in the year 2011. Now, I get that religion is a pretty sensitive subject, but I believe that you can joke about even the most sensitive of subjects and have it be funny rather than offensive. So long as you're tasteful about it and not actively trying to be offensive. I'm talking to you, Family Guy and High School USA. And unlike Family Guy or High School USA, God, the Devil, and Bob never actively tries to be offensive, and they stay very tasteful. And as a result, it's a great show that both Christians and atheists could get a lot of enjoyment out of. God is wholesome, the Devil's funny, and Bob is one of the most relatable characters I've ever watched. And the show has a lot of really funny biblical meta-humor, for lack of a better word. Like God welcoming a bunch of newborn babies into the world by telling them,
"Now you'll be famous, you'll be rich, you are going to love wearing your wife's clothes."
Or when Bob asks the Devil that if his dad isn't in hell, then is he in purgatory? And the Devil just laughs and says they made that up. But what really makes this show stand out is the good morals and the somber, heartfelt moments. Like, if you like shows like Duckman or BoJack Horseman that can make you both laugh and cry, I definitely recommend checking out God, the Devil, and Bob. Giant robots, aliens, hot rods, video games, anime, 80s voice actors. Megas XLR is a show that I thought was okay as a kid, but love as an adult. So much of the show's humor went over my head as a kid that I get the feeling Megas XLR was one of those shows for adults disguised as a show for kids, like Ren and Stimpy or Rocko's Modern Life. But sadly, despite how awesome the show was, Cartoon Network cancelled it because they didn't want anything competing with the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy, and the show's incredible animation was really expensive. But fortunately, the show's creators and Titmouse managed to get the rights to their show back from Cartoon Network, but unfortunately they can't do anything with it without getting in big trouble with the IRS. You see, since Cartoon Network wrote Megas off as a loss on their taxes, that means that this IP can never be used for profit in the US again. Ever. And that is a fucking travesty. And also the reason why the only way you can watch the show legally in the US is to buy it on iTunes. Which, again, is a f***ing travesty, because this show needs at least some sort of revival where they get Jack Black to either play or voice Coop. From the genius behind Samurai Jack, Star Wars Clone Wars, and Primal, comes Genndy Tartakovsky's Symbionic Titan, a show that fully encapsulates everything we've come to know and love about Genndy Tartakovsky's work. Creative character and monster designs, fluid animation, gorgeous backgrounds, good comedy, and a sound design that really sells the mood. But sadly, Cartoon Network determined that Symbionic Titan wasn't conducive enough to selling toys, so they gave it the Megas XLR treatment. where they canceled it and wrote it off on their taxes, so the show's effectively dead forever, and the only way to legally watch it in the US is to buy it on iTunes. Gendy himself has gone on record stating that the worst day he's ever had was the day he found out Titan had been cancelled, when he just got done writing the first 10 episodes of Season 2. I have no idea why the networks keep doing this tax write-off thing. If the network doesn't want to spend more money on new episodes, that's fine. But surely reruns, syndication, DVDs, and streaming could make the network more money than they would save by just writing the show off on their taxes. From the creator of Megas XLR and the character designer behind Zima Blue and the Gorillas comes Motor City, an awesome show about hot rod driving rebels fighting against an evil dictator in a post-apocalyptic Detroit, with some of the most epic animation I've ever seen. But the show's a lot more than just some flashy visuals, as it also has some really interesting plot points and extremely likable characters, all brought to life by an all-star voice cast, including Brian Doyle Murray, Tara Strong, Mark Hamill, Dee Snider of all people, and, well...
I can still punch, but my car won't start. Dragons with laser beam eyes! Think about it!
Alright, when I first watched the show, I thought for sure Texas was voiced by Patrick Warburton, but as it turns out, he's actually voiced by Jess Harnell, the voice of Wacko from the Animaniacs. Now that guy has some serious range, but back on topic. As awesome as the show was, it only lasted for one season back in 2012, mostly because it aired exclusively on Disney XD. For those that don't know, as with Nickelodeon and the Nicktoons network, Disney XD is Disney Channel's secondary premium cable network that only about a third of US households get. And thus, it's where Disney sends shows they don't care about to die, because if they air exclusively on Disney XD, they're very unlikely to get the ratings needed to be renewed for another season. But why would Disney spend so much money on expensive animation, celebrity voice actors, and Dee Snider, just to throw it on a secondary network they don't care about where it has almost no chance of being successful? Well, I'll answer this question when I get to my number one pick, because the two are related. But first, here's some quick honorable mentions. Young Justice. This show was originally cancelled in 2013 due to poor toy sales, but thanks to the support of fans, it got the revival it deserved, and since then, I feel like it's gotten the solid run it deserved. Duckman. I love this show, and it definitely did not deserve to end on a cliffhanger, but I left off the list because it got 70 episodes, which is at least thrice what most of the shows on this list got. Thundercats 2011. I'm gonna have to give this one its own video because there's actually a lot to talk about with this one. Infinity Train? I never saw this one, so I can't vouch for its quality, though I do know it absolutely did not deserve to get the Megas XLR treatment in the wake of the Warner Bros. Discovery merger. Alright, enough stalling. On to the number one pick. The early 2010s were truly a golden age of great, epic, beautiful action cartoons that were all sadly dead on arrival. And easily my favorite out of all of them was 2012's Tron Uprising. A pseudo-prequel to 2010's Tron Legacy that takes a page out of Batman Beyond's playbook, by sending around an injured Tron training a young program named Beck to be a successor to lead an uprising against Clue. A simple premise made absolutely awesome thanks to epic music, jaw-dropping plot twists, constant nods to the classic Tron, a gorgeous art style from the genius behind Zima Blue, Motor City, and the Gorillas, and likable, well-developed characters, all brought to life by yet another all-star voice cast, including Elijah Wood, Mandy Moore, Reginald VelJohnson, and even got Tron's original actor, Bruce Boxleitner, to reprise his role as Tron. But sadly, as awesome as the show was, it was cancelled on a cliffhanger after only one season. Now how could a show this great possibly not be successful? Well, the truth is, as with Motor City, it's because Disney sabotaged it. They constantly moved it around the schedule, barely advertised it, put it on hiatus and never advertised its return, and as a final death blow, they dumped it on Disney XD to die. Now I'm sure you're wondering, why on earth would Disney spend what looks like a ridiculous amount of money on shows like Tron Uprising or Motor City, only to not let them gain traction? Well, both these shows came out in 2012, and you know what else happened in 2012? That's around the time Disney acquired Star Wars. Disney likely didn't want anything competing with their Marvel and newly acquired Star Wars properties. And also, let's take a quick look at the historical context of the Tron franchise. The original 1982 Tron film was made specifically to capitalize on the popularity of Star Wars, and since then, despite the massive cult following, the Tron franchise hasn't exactly been very profitable. The original Tron was a financial failure, while Tron Legacy wound up doing just okay at the box office when Disney was hoping it would be a record-breaking cash cow like Avatar was the year prior. And so Disney likely decided, who needs a franchise that was made to chase a trend when they can just milk the biggest trendsetter in the history of cinema to death? And let's not forget perhaps the most financially important part of any TV or movie series, the merch. If there's one thing I've learned over the years about entertainment, especially animated entertainment, it's that merch makes the world go round. More specifically, toys. Well-established legacy franchises like Star Wars and Marvel tend to sell a lot more toys than niche cult franchises like Tron, or new IPs like Motor City. When Grandpa's shopping for toys for his grandson's birthday, he's more likely to gravitate towards Darth Vader and Spider-Man because those are characters that he as a grandpa recognizes, and already knows that kids like. And thus, the industry has gotten to a point where if you want more from an IP, it's no longer enough to just watch the content. You also gotta vote with your money and buy the merch. But fortunately, a third Tron movie, Tron Ares, is currently in pre-production, so it looks like Disney hasn't abandoned the Tron franchise completely. And those were 8 great cartoons that absolutely did not deserve to be cancelled. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and boost if you're watching on Odyssey. Also, feel free to follow me on Mastodon. You guys fuel my flames.